You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Ben Franklin's World Revisited, a series of classic episodes that bring fresh perspective to our latest episodes and add deeper connections to our understanding of early American history. And I'm your host, Liz Covart. Scandal, betrayal, and attempted murder. These aren't just the makings of a modern-day crime thriller. They're at the heart of a shocking case from Colonial Newport, Rhode Island in 1738. In 1738, Benedict Arnold filed for divorce from his wife Mary Arnold, who he accused of infidelity and attempted murder. Now, this case made its way before the Rhode Island General Assembly, which is how the details of the inner workings of the Arnolds' marriage, as well as Mary's adultery, theft, and attempted murder, came to light before the people of Rhode Island and were inscribed into our historical record. As we celebrate Women's History Month, Mary Arnold's case reminds us that the early American lives of women were shaped not only by the personal choices they made, but also by the legal, social, and cultural forces all around them. Elaine Foreman Crane, a distinguished professor of history at Fordham University, takes us deep inside the poison plot, unraveling a tale of love, deception, and justice in a world where women's voices were often unheard. Now, as we revisit episode 225, Elaine reveals what we know about Benedict and Mary Ward Arnold and the circumstances of their marriage, why and how Mary Arnold may have attempted to poison Benedict Arnold, and what the story of Mary and Benedict Arnold reveals to us about early American history. Okay, are you ready to revisit with Elaine Foreman Crane? Allow me to reintroduce you to her. Our guest is a distinguished professor of history at Fordham University. She's authored numerous articles and 5 books, including Witches, Wife-Beaters, and Whores, Common Law and Common Folk in Early America, and, most recently, The Poison Plot, a tale of adultery and murder in Colonial Newport. Welcome to Ben Franklin's World, Elaine Foreman Crane.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
Now, The Poison Plot is an interesting tale. Elaine uses the scandalous divorce proceedings of Mary Ward and Benedict Arnold to explore the relationship between commerce, culture, and crime in early America. Elaine, this seems like a really revealing story. So I wonder if we could start with you telling us a bit about the main characters in this plot. Would you tell us a bit about Mary Ward and Benedict Arnold?
I sure will. First of all, it's a small story. It's a micro-history, as we call it, with large implications, not only local, but as far as international is concerned. But Mary Ward and Benedict Arnold, what about them? Mary Ward was a Connecticut woman who somehow met Benedict Arnold, who was the grandfather of the notorious traitor, but that, of course, is later in our story. She is almost 20 years younger than the man that she will marry. How she met him, I do not know. I have 100 pages of documents, but those documents are limited to the divorce proceeding. And they are commentaries on Mary, commentaries on Benedict, but reveal very little about the nature of Newport itself. And I know very little about Mary Ward's early life. I know very little about Benedict Arnold's early life. And what is most confusing is that since everybody in early America had exactly the same name, it seems, at the time we are talking about, 1738, 1739, there were 6 Benedict Arnolds at the same time. So I had to be very careful to make sure that every time I wrote something or did a piece of research, I was pointing to the right Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, I've encountered that name problem in my own research. It really seems like many families seem to have 1 or 2 names that every generation wants to pass on, which is really hard for the historian. Now, I'd like to go back to something you said at the start, which is the Poison Plot is a microhistory, a story with large implications. Would you tell us a bit more about what a microhistory is and how it differs from other types of history that we read or hear about?
I will try. I say try because there are lots of ways to interpret microhistory. There was a wonderful conference in Rochester, New York last November, a microhistory conference. And by the end of the conference, I think people were less sure about what microhistory actually is. I call it a small story, but it can be a small story with large implications. But you can take it a step further and say, well, is a biography of a single person, a microhistory? I can't answer that. So I would just say for our purposes here today, it's a story that took place at a particular moment in time over several months in 1738, 1739. But beyond that, it's hard to define it.
In fairness, I guess that question was like walking into a room full of historians and asking them to define a period like the American Revolution. Like if I asked 100 historians what the American Revolution was, I'd get 100 different answers.
Yes, I would say that that is absolutely true.
Now, you noted earlier that between 1738 and 1739, you found at least 6 Benedict Arnolds in different historical records. And as a result, you mentioned that you had to be really careful to make sure that you were citing the right Benedict Arnold. How exactly were you careful? Would you tell us a bit about how you conducted your research into the lives of Mary Ward and Benedict Arnold?
This is a Rhode Island story. And I have finally, in the end, about 100 documents. But as I said, they are limited to the divorce proceeding. The story sort of fell in my lap, and it is a part of the larger story of Newport in those years. How did I find them? They found me. How's that? Benedict and Mary Arnold found me.
How did they find you?
In this one divorce petition. I've been working in legal history. I've been working in the archives of Rhode Island in Pawtucket. And there's a whole volume, or several volumes actually, of petitions. The volume I'm talking about is 1738, 1739. And I sort of browsed through it. And there, Benedict and Mary found me. I say that because I didn't just find them. We met. Let's put it that way. We met.
So you mentioned earlier that we know very little about the early lives of Benedict Arnold and Mary Ward Arnold. But we do know that Benedict was about 19 years older than Mary and that he had 5 children when they married. So why do you think Mary agreed to marry Benedict Arnold? Was it for love? Is there any way to know what the attraction between them was?
She was not marrying for love. You don't poison your husband after that many years and still talk about marrying for love. She married for money. She married for property, of which he had a lot. Remember, he may be the grandfather of a trader, but he's the grandson of the governor of Rhode Island in the founding years of Rhode Island. And we're not talking about 10 acres or 20 acres. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of acres. He is a very wealthy landed man, despite the downturn in Rhode Island's economy in the 1730s. But he held on to a great part of his land.
Arnold may have been land rich, but what did he do for a living? Was it really just his land that made him wealthy, or did he have some connection to the slave trade? And I ask about the slave trade specifically because we know from our conversation with Christy Clark Pujara in episode 118 that Rhode Island was really a driver of the early American slave economy, and everybody in Rhode Island seemed to have a connection with it.
I don't know the answer to that. I never found it. I have no reason to think that he was. He may be a merchant, he may be a trader, but he is still a cooper. He's a barrel maker. Now, he may be a very rich landed barrel maker, but his trade is that of someone who creates the barrels, that takes the rum to the islands and sells it for slaves.
Okay, I guess I'm still trying to figure out what the attraction for Mary must have been. I mean, Arnold was much older. He already had those 5 kids. And we know from our conversations with other guests that most of his landed wealth wouldn't have gone to Mary, but to Arnold's children, specifically to his eldest son. So why do you think she married him?
Yeah, absolutely. But I can't answer that question any further than the documents tell me. I don't know how they met. I don't know what she looked like. Contagious diseases were rampant. Did she have some? I don't know. Was she articulate? I don't know that. I know she can't write, but can she read? I can't be assured of that. I would like to think she could, because the temper of the times was such that women were likely to learn how to read even if they couldn't write. So I don't know much about her. I just know that obviously they did meet, they did marry, and the events that followed happened. 100 documents say they happened.
Yeah, let's talk about those events that followed. So, in December 1738, Benedict Arnold filed for divorce. And when he filed his petition, he claimed that he was the victim of a thwarted poison plot engineered by his adulterous wife, Mary Ward Arnold, and her lover, Walter Motley. Elaine, there is definitely a lot in these 100 documents that you found. So, would you take us through the Arnold's divorce petition and what it says about Mary's supposed poison plot against Benedict?
Yes. First of all, I want to draw your attention to Motley. I mean, that's just such a wonderful name. You can't make this stuff up. Walter Motley and Turf the Bayman. Mary had apparently been cavorting around with someone named Turf. I don't even know his first name, but Turf the Bayman. And she admitted as such to Benedict. He is affronted, of course, but he doesn't do anything. He still leaves her property. Then she carries on with Walter Motley, and she and Motley decide that they can't wait any longer for her husband to die. He's in his 50s, but they can't wait any longer. So she and Motley decide they're going to poison him so that Mary will, as his widow, inherit her widow's portion, which is, as you must have guessed by now, a lot of land. But remember, I can only repeat what I know from those records.
Do those records happen to tell us anything about why Mary sought a romantic relationship outside of her marriage with Benedict?
No, they do not. Her voice is absent. The petition is written by Benedict Arnold to the Rhode Island General Assembly. He accuses her, and every document that I have supports him. She's absent. Her voice is absent. What would she have said? How would she have explained her position? I don't know. I can only infer that after 19 years of marriage to this man, she did not want to be married to him any longer. And she had a couple of boyfriends. She was sleeping around. And as Benedict himself said, Mary accordingly gave him a dose of poison in an egg dram, which worked on him in so violent a manner, upwards and downwards, that he despaired of his life and at length was rendered delirious. That's a quote from the petition itself. And Mary at this time saw him very, very sick, and she refused to help him, and she left him, as she said, or as Benedict interpreted it, she left him to dally with her Irishman. Walter Motley was her Irishman. But Benedict was still alive. Sick, but alive. And he finally figures out she doesn't want to be married to him any longer.
I know we don't have a lot of specifics here, but why do you think Mary attempted to get out of her marriage by poisoning Benedict? I mean, couldn't she have just filed her own divorce petition?
She could have, but it would have been a very rare occurrence. Rhode Island and the other colonies had very few divorces to begin with in the 18th century, and it is not likely that someone who could not write would have filed a divorce. Very few female divorces in Rhode Island at this time. Very few female divorce petitions anywhere. It was a male world.
So what does the rarity of divorce petitions by women in colonial British America and the fact that Benedict Arnold's petition completely lacked Mary's voice say about colonial women's ability to seek any kind of legal redress in colonial period? Do you think this case study says anything more about women's ability to seek and gain legal remedies and protections in this era?
They had very few avenues to pursue. I have always felt that women were very dependent. You asked why she married Benedict to begin with. She, like many, many women in early America in the 17th and 18th centuries, had to depend on a man to provide for them. At the same time, however, they were not totally without options. Women had jobs outside the home. But there's one thing I want you to understand. I want everybody to understand about what that meant. When I say outside the home, I meant they had skills that they could use to earn a little money of their own. But they performed these skills inside their home or at shops attached to homes. So when you say, what did she do? She doesn't leave us anything to tell us what kind of skills she might have had. But I get no sense that she is contributing to the family well-being. That's his land that he either buys and sells more, that he rents out. The income is on his side. At least that's what the documents that I have tell me. There are none from her directly. So I don't know if she could do any more than the documents show. Benedict never says so, or at least this Benedict never says so.
So how do you as a historian trace the lives of women if, like Mary Ward Arnold, they largely didn't leave us a trail of documents?
You may not be able to. So I would like to think, not that there are a lot of Marys out there who try to poison their husbands, because I don't believe that's the case at all. But I would like to think that there are hundreds, thousands of very capable women who have skills, who bring to their marriages a way of earning income, even though it does not show up in account books. Sometimes it does. The documents I was working with were divorce papers. Lots of them, lots of witnesses and so forth, but they're not account books. Account books are the best sources of a different story, because even if they are written by men and the accounts are in the husband's name, he could say, my wife sold a pair of stockings that she knitted. Not a lot of money, perhaps, to bring in, but it does show that women did A, B, or C to enhance the family income. I see none of this in the Arnold case.
Now, in his petition, Benedict Arnold claimed that his wife Mary tried to poison him, and that, her lover Walter Motley was involved in this plot because they wanted to get married. That sounds like attempted murder to me. And Leslie wonders whether murder or attempted murder was a common type of crime in colonial British America.
The murder rate, the crime rate is very, very low. But remember, poison is a silent crime. I can't tell you what the potential number of poisonings were. Couldn't possibly. I can tell you about burglaries only if someone is captured, tried, and convicted. So we really don't know what the crime rate is. My gut tells me the crime rate is higher, much higher than we see from the standard records, because the records only show who has been tried, convicted, and sentenced.
So if Mary really did try to poison Benedict, how would she have attempted to do it? Do we have any information about how she would have acquired a poison or the different types of poison she would have used?
Yes, that I can tell you, because the documents I have talk about her going to the apothecary. John Tweedy was the apothecary, and he no doubt sold her the arsenic or mercury that she used to try to poison her husband. There was no big deal to go to an apothecary and get a poison. All you had to do was say, I'd like some ratsbane, 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 which the apothecary would pick off his shelf and say, I see, Mrs. Arnold, I guess you have a lot of rats in your house. And she would say, yes, I do. And that's what I need the ratsbane for. Or she may have used the word arsenic directly or mercury directly. Mercury is not what you'd kill rats with, but that's what may have happened. Can I tell you as an historian that that's definitely what happened? I can tell you that it's likely, but that's about the best I can do for you.
Okay, so we know that Benedict's divorce petition says that he believes that Mary really tried to poison him. Do we know whether Benedict ever tried to contact the police about Mary? I mean, would a colonial American even try to contact the police if their life was in danger, or was there perhaps a different customer response for this?
There's no police. There's a sheriff and there's an assistant deputy sheriff. If Benedict went to the authorities, I like to use the word authorities because I never really know who's in charge. If Benedict went to the authorities, I have no record of it. Did he talk about it to friends? Was Mary open with what she did in front of other people? Yeah, I see that. And that's why we have so many documents, because I have people testifying, Mary said this, Mary did that. So if you want to call that her voice, okay, but it is indirect. It's not coming from a document from Mary, but it is coming from people who would say, Mary did this, Mary said that. I was there, the deponent might say. But that's the best I can do to bring Mary to the forefront. Do I get the feeling that she is a person who is not someone we could take pride in from early America? Yeah, that's exactly what I think. Do I believe that she actually tried to poison him? Yes, I think it's possible.
I know you said that we have a paucity of records when it comes to attempted marital poisonings and adultery, but as you have looked at a lot of different records, do you have a sense of just how widespread the practice of adultery by men and women was in colonial Newport, or even in the wider world of colonial America? And I ask because Marcia is curious if adultery was a widespread practice.
It's impossible to know how pervasive adultery was. Do I think it's a lot more than the number of poisonings? Of course I do. But I can't tell you that. I can't answer it. Adultery and poisonings are both silent crimes. The records are very, very sparse in terms of such activities. I can't answer the question because the documents will not help in terms of data, in terms of statistics. It will tell you how many people are prosecuted, and that is very, very few.
Even if we can't know exactly how widespread the practice and crime of adultery was, we do know that colonial Americans were talking about it. In her book, The Poison Plot, Elaine discusses how during the 1730s, there was a popular literature that openly discussed adultery and possibly even influenced Mary Arnold's infidelity. Elaine, would you talk to us about this literature and how it may have influenced Mary's actions?
Yes, there is a literature. Novels are becoming fashionable. Novels start to circulate in the early 18th century. They are all English, 99% in English. And it's part of a circulating culture. Remember, I cannot promise you that Mary could read, but I make the argument that she didn't have to read in order to become acquainted with Eliza Haywood's books, particularly The Injured Husband. As these books cross the Atlantic from England, they circulate, and it would be chatter. It would be the equivalent of what we might call our book clubs. But beyond that, I can't tell you how she would have known about it. Did she have friends who read the book? I have no doubt that she did. Can I promise you she read it? No, I can't promise you that. But I think I can promise you that since Eliza Haywood was one of the most popular authors of 18th century England and America, that she would have known about this. And the story just is so completely comparable to her own life. I have to believe, I do believe, that she knew about the literature that's circulating, and she knew about Eliza Haywood's Injured Husband.
Interesting. Would you tell us about the story Eliza Haywood wrote about in The Injured Husband and how it was comparable to Mary Ward Arnold's life?
Yes, it's a 1723 story, and it is about a baron and a baroness, and It's the Baron de Tortelay and his wife, and it parallels the Arnold story so completely that this is why I say she must have known about it. The Baron himself of Heywood's injured husband is perhaps a good man, a naive man. He's no longer a young man when he meets Mademoiselle Lamotte, and she's much younger than he is. She is fairly poor, and he is besotted with her. She pretends that she loves him. She contrives a very fast wedding, and she is suddenly a very rich woman. And she becomes the Baroness de Tortelay. And she finds, within a very short time, other bedfellows. And according to Heywood's narrative, I love this quote, since her marriage with this foolish baron, she has been had by half the town. This would certainly have been seen as excessive by New England standards. So the baron eventually discovers his spouse's machinations, and he enters a room where she is having a go at it with her lover. And the baron is very astonished and distraught. He's so upset that he can't even draw his sword. The baroness is caught in the act, but she's smart. She sees him there and she says, help, help, a rape, so that it looks as though she's not a willing partner here. The baron believes her and he melts, Heywood says, in a sea of tenderness, declaring how pure and untainted his wife was. So the Baroness is now a little upset because she thinks that she may be in trouble. So she decides to act. And she says, if this meddling husband was no longer to be blinded, he must be removed. And she has to murder him. So she gives her husband a potion containing what Heywood says were pernicious drugs. Comparable to the Arnold saga, a skilled physician cures the Baron, and of course his wife is very disappointed. So the Baron pawns her jewels because she now has to pay other men to murder her husband. But the word of the Baron's death at the hands of the men that the Baroness hires, the word of his death never arrives. And the Baroness is found by her husband to have contracted debts for luxury items. All these accusations fall on the Baroness's head. She denies them all. But now the Baron, who survived, is finally convinced that she had tried to kill him. The ending is a literary ending. The Baron dies during a sword fight, and the Baroness poisons herself. A very equitable end. So that's the end of The Injured Husband. Both characters die. As we know, Benedict Arnold died shortly after the divorce, but Mary Arnold remains very unrepentant, and she remarries twice in the following years. So that's the story of The Injured Husband and subsequent events in the Arnold family.
So Mary may have been influenced by The Injured Husband, but what about Benedict? Was this novel the kind of work a man like Benedict Arnold would have read? And if he did read it, or if he might have read it, how might the novel have impacted his views about what was happening in his own marriage?
Well, we don't know, but there's no reason to think that he wouldn't have been as persuaded as she was by the plot of the novel. Why wouldn't he take another look at Mary and say, this is going on in English society. Maybe that's what's actually going on here. Do I know that this happened? No, of course, because he never says anything like that. But he does petition for divorce. So he must believe that Mary did, in fact, try to poison him. It's a congruence of events, literary and actual, that transpired across the Atlantic with English cousins, cousins being a metaphor.
We've already talked about how we don't know as much about Mary and Benedict Arnold as we'd like to. But Elaine, you did find their divorce proceedings, which contains more than 100 manuscript pages. And after we take a moment to talk about our episode sponsor, I'd love for us to explore the information and documents contained in these proceedings. Elaine, what information and documents do the 100 manuscript pages you found contain and consist of? You mentioned that they're all from the Arnold's divorce proceedings and that they're all from Benedict's point of view. So what are the documents in these proceedings and what do they have to say about Benedict's point of view?
All I can say is that the General Assembly must have asked for evidence to support the accusations that Benedict leveled against his wife, because all I have are the depositions, the witness statements. So I'm assuming the General Assembly, after receiving Benedict's petition, scoured the town for people who might be able to confirm or deny his story. So that's where these statements come from. And each and every one of them say, yeah, I'm not surprised at this. It's more the adultery that people attest to. Yeah, I saw Mary and Motley in their underwear sitting on the edge of a bed. I saw Mary and Motley kissing. I saw Mary and Motley in bed together. So the accusations are substantiated by these people.
So when you say people, did Benedict really seek evidence from both men and women? I mean, didn't the voices of men have a higher standing in the court?
Men's voice did have higher standing in the court, but these depositions are from both men and women, and they were accepted as truth. He had to swear to them. So they were believed. I have always been very interested in the way in which women were part of court proceedings, not necessarily the adultery, not necessarily burglary, but petty crimes or civil cases. And many times they prevailed. I am working on a piece, I've just about finished an article called The Vintner and the Indian. It's about a vintner and his servant who is an Indian. The vintner wants her to sign a document that would bind this woman to him, and she refuses to sign. And you'd think, given what we think we know about Indian-Anglo relationships, that the court would have supported the vintner. They don't. All the way up the line, they support the Indian woman. And they say, no, she doesn't have to sign this indenture. She doesn't have to be bound to him. So I guess what I would say is it varies from case to case. Sometimes women win, sometimes men win. But I'm astounded by the number of times and the way in which the courts find in favor of women.
Now, you mentioned that the injured husband ended with a literary ending, that both the Baron and the Baroness died at the end. How did the real-life story of Benedict and Mary Ward Arnold play out? Did the General Assembly grant Benedict's petition for divorce? And if it did, what happened to Benedict and Mary once their marriage was dissolved?
The General Assembly does grant the divorce. Justice, or alleged justice, is much quicker in the 18th century than it is today. Much, much quicker. And they grant the divorce. Benedict dies a couple of months later. Was it due to the poison that he had ingested earlier? Can't tell you. But he was a very sick, weak man by the spring of 1739, and he dies in March. The divorce had been granted barely a month earlier. Mary, on the other hand, goes on to marry two other men, which I have always found a little surprising because word must have traveled about the possibility that she poisoned her husband. And why would any man marry a woman who allegedly poisoned her husband? But two men did, John Brown and Samuel Roberts. And they both predecease Mary. They both had been married before. They both had children, but they marry her. What her attraction was, I cannot tell you. It kills me that I can't figure this one out. Was she beautiful? I have no idea. On the other hand, the collapse of the economy in the 1730s means that she does not end up a very wealthy woman. But she survives until I think it was 1769. So she's in her 60s when she dies, which is pretty good for the 18th century. Not terribly unusual, but pretty good.
Now, at the start of our conversation, you mentioned that the story of Mary and Benedict Arnold was a microhistory, which meant that it may be a small story, but that it has large implications. So what are the larger implications of this story?
I think it must alter our perception of women, at least to the extent that women were not always the submissive, deferential people that historians have ascribed to their character. I think that's important. This is not to say that women went around poisoning their husbands, but it does suggest, and I say this in the book, that there are other women who are alert and who are skillful and are creative and active and undeferential to the men who surround them. And I think that's very important because historians have played down the role of women for so long that we really have to take another look at what they actually did and said and how they acted out their lives.
Also, towards the start of our conversation, you mentioned that the Benedict Arnold that we've been talking about of these divorce proceedings was the grandfather of the Benedict Arnold, the Revolutionary War hero turned traitor. How did you perform the genealogical research needed to make this connection? Was it an obvious connection?
This was one of the hardest things to do. If you had a traitor in your family and you're part of a successive generation, how truthful would you want to be about the family's history, the family's genealogy? I say this to answer your question because it was a very, very difficult job. I never pinned down the year members of the family were born. Well, Benedict, Mary's husband, I could pin down, but his children, his son Benedict, couldn't do it because different genealogists gave him different years of birth. And the genealogists are relying on family memos, family histories, and so forth. And there are a lot of them, and they all give different dates for family members. One or two of the genealogies leaves Mary Arnold out altogether. She never existed. But of course, we know she did.
And one last question before we move into the time warp. I wonder if you have any advice for us, because many historians and people who research their family trees encounter challenges when it comes to finding information. And in your case, you found that there wasn't a lot of information about Mary and Benedict Arnold outside of the divorce proceedings. And when you turned to genealogical sources, you found conflicting genealogies. So do you have any advice for us on how we can track down the information we're looking for and how we can circumvent what seem like dead ends?
Rule number 1, do not rely on the internet. Rule number 2, do not rely on the internet. You have to go to the archives. You have to get original documents. You have to travel. Rule number 3, do not rely on the internet.
And now it's time for the time warp. This is the fun segment of the show where we ask you a hypothetical history question about what might have happened if something had occurred differently or if someone had acted differently. Now, we can't know for certain whether Mary actually attempted to poison Benedict, but assuming that she did attempt to poison him, in your opinion, how would Mary's life have been different if she'd been successful and Benedict had died before their divorce?
She would have been a very rich lady. That's the answer to that. She would have been able to acquire a third of his property at the very least. And if he forgave her and gave her more in a will, she would have been even richer. So if he had not died, if he had forgiven her, she would have come out very well. She was impatient. If she hadn't been so impatient and if she hadn't slept around, she would have come out much better than she actually did, I think.
So now that you've finished investigating the story of Benedict and Mary Ward Arnold, what aspect of history are you investigating now?
Well, as I said, I've just finished a good draft of the vintner and the Indian. The vintner is William Heffernan of Newport, and the Indian was Catherine Cooper. I've sent that off to the editor of a compilation of microhistories, which will be published hopefully sometime in 2019 or 2020. And I'm waiting to hear back. I have not had enough people reading this. It's 30 pages to know the flaws yet, to know where I have to bolster up the evidence. But when I do, then I will redraw, redraft, rethink what people have asked me to do. I was very lucky with the poison plot because some very well-established historians took the time to read various drafts and say, you got to do this, you got to do that. And I have such respect for that. I did it. And I will do the same thing with the vintner and the Indian. Although I have to tell you, I have qualms about using the word Indian since it is a contested word these days. Some people say, well, I have to title it The Vintner and the Servant, but not The Vintner and the Indian. So I'm very torn because a number of native tribes say it's perfectly all right to use the word Indian. So I'm caught in the middle there, and that's where I stand at this point. I'm not quite sure what to do.
And this is an article-length project or book chapter?
Yes. I haven't stumbled on anything yet that would make me think I want to write another book. When I think of another 6 years to involve myself in traveling and searching out material for a book, it would really have to be something engaging. But having spent most of my career, pretty much all my career, on Rhode Island, I did buy a set of documents for early New Amsterdam, which would allow me to search material here in New York and see perhaps if there's a story there that would engage me as much.
Well, I really hope you find something engaging in your documents because I think we've really gotten a sense from our conversation with you that historians need to engage in a lot of back and forth when they work on a new project, and that producing an article or a book project better be engaging because it can really mean multiple years of work.
Oh, does it ever? On the other hand, I retired from teaching a while ago and now have more time to devote to my first love, which is writing. And I'm lucky enough to live in New York and within walking distance of the New York Public Library, where I say hello to the lions every time I walk by.
Now, how can we contact you if we have more questions about Mary and Benedict Arnold or about Colonial Newport and Rhode Island?
My email is readily available to anybody who wants it. People will tell you I answer, and I not only answer, but I answer immediately and give as much information as I possibly can to people. I enjoy that, and I have time to do that now. So I have gotten emails and requests for information about that, about other things that relate to the 18th century from around the country. And that's very rewarding, actually.
Elaine Foreman Crane, thank you for taking us through the very interesting divorce proceedings of Benedict and Mary Ward Arnold, and for showing us how they reveal much more about the wider world of historical sources and of colonial British American legal and gender history.
It is my pleasure to have done it, and I am very happy to have had the invitation. Thank you.
The Poison Plot tells the small story of why Benedict Arnold wanted to divorce his wife, Mary Ward Arnold. But as a microhistory, this is a small story with large implications. As Elaine revealed, the story of Benedict Arnold must alter our conception of women in colonial America. Benedict's divorce petition and all the supporting evidence accompanying it reveals that Mary was not the submissive, deferential helpmeet that many historians have portrayed colonial American women as being. In reality, Mary was defiant. She openly carried on romantic affairs, and she even plotted to kill her husband with poison, all in an effort to do what she felt was convenient and best for her. Of course, that was Mary. As Elaine reminded us, we can't assume that all or even a majority of colonial women went around trying to poison their husbands. That was an extreme measure. But what we can assume is that most women were often undeferential to the men around them, and that they often acted in ways that they thought best and appropriate. In essence, the story of Mary and Benedict shows us that colonial women may have had a lot of formal social and legal restrictions around their lives, but during the day-to-day of their lives, they thought for themselves and acted for themselves and their families. Now, another interesting facet of this microhistory is how it reveals the archives to us. We construct the archives we keep, whether they be formal institutional archives like the Rhode Island State Archives, or informal archives, like those we keep regarding the genealogy of our families. Archives tend to privilege those like Benedict Arnold, who left a documentary trail, and often underrepresent the records and points of view of people like Mary Ward Arnold, people who couldn't write or generate as much of a paper trail. Sometimes, archives also give preference to the stories that we want to promote and tell, while obscuring or even trying to erase those stories that we don't want to promote or tell. Like the fact that your family could be related to the infamous traitor Benedict Arnold. So when we look at historical records from the past, we need to ask ourselves a bunch of questions. Who wrote the records that we're looking at? Why did that person create those records? And what information or people might be absent from those records, and why are they absent? This is where the help of other historians can be really helpful. Historians rely on the expertise and advice of each other to help them further their research and produce the best works possible. As Elaine noted, it's helpful to have someone look at your work and tell you where else you might find additional records related to your topic, or where you might want to be more critical of what a historical source says or does not say, or even where you might want to bolster your argument and evidence to make a more convincing case for your interpretation of those records. So in this case, the poison plot is a small story with larger implications because it's with this small story that we can see more about the everyday lives and experiences of colonial women, how the legal system of colonial America worked and who it privileged, and how archives and historians work. You'll find more information about Elaine, her book, The Poison Plot, plus notes for everything we talked about today on the show notes page, benfranklinsworld.com/225. Production assistance for this podcast comes from Joseph Edelman, Karen Wolf, and Morgan McCullough. Breakmaster Cylinder composed our custom theme music. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. To discover and listen to their other podcasts, visit airwavemedia.com. I'll see you next week with a brand new episode where we'll explore how women helped the Haudenosaunee access global trade in the colonial and early republic periods.